Hello and welcome to Deep in the D-Pad, where we explore all things gaming through an intellectual lens. I'm your friendly neighborhood host and level designer, Carlos, and with me as always is RK Taylor.
What's up? Yo, we didn't have a fun talking intro, we have a lame intro. We're boring today, whatever.
Today we're talking about video game peripherals. What are they? What shapes and forms do they come in? And how do they help enhance our play experience when actually interfacing with the game it's made for? But before we get too deep into this D-pad, let's enjoy some D-pad delights. So Ryan, why don't you kick us off this session for D-pad delights?
Definitely. I was planning to talk about like peripheral related D-pad delight, but we haven't even defined peripherals yet, so let's not do that now, I guess. But I will say that something that felt life-changing at the time was the Qwerty keyboard extender for the 360 controller. For anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, it was like a full keyboard that attached to the base of the controller, and you could type messages super quickly. And because this was like a platform, this was for the 360, right? And this was a platform that, you know, one of the first platforms where you could play online and, you know, have this like amazing connectivity with other people, right? So sending messages was like actually pretty important. And I'm sure they still make this, but I don't have one. I don't use it now. But just as a teenager, that was like such a lifesaver to not have to like scroll with your cursor. You know, do you hear
Yeah,
me,
it was really deal? Like such a pain to navigate the full keyboard using just like the left joystick. Some people would maybe use the D-pad. I know I got to a point where basically like I knew like the shortest route between certain keys because I was just like writing
Y
so many
is space
messages.
Bar, like right trigger is shift, that kind of thing. Is that's what you're talking about?
No, not so much that. Like those are like shortcuts and it's great to know those. But no, I'm talking about literally like the route of travel between like the S key and like the O key when you're like thumbing through on the joystick. It's like click, 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 up, click, up, down. Like I got into like such a flow with that. I kind of wanted that keyboard plugin for the 360, but like my own like thumb dexterity had just gotten so fast that it was like, why even get this? Like, I think my dad saw me like writing a message one day on 360 and he's like, whoa, why don't you slow down there? You're going to break the controller.
Yeah, your fingers are flying at like a mile a minute.
And of course, these keyboard attachments, they just make, you know, smack talking that much easier, right, Ambassador Ryan?
I mean, maybe back in the day, I would have been prone to smack talk. I don't have it. Like I said, I don't have a keyboard anymore. I don't really feel like I need it as much. You know, I feel like voice chat. Even then, though, voice chat was pretty ubiquitous. You know, I don't know why I needed this. You know, I didn't have a job. I didn't have a job, and you know, this is still something I requested, like probably in lieu of a game at some point in my life. You know, and it's like the idea that I couldn't send a text. Like I absolutely needed to have some kind of in-game mechanism. And the fact that they sold it was also really cool, you know? I mean, this is...
Oh, well, you know what? Actually, it's funny you mentioned that, like a synapse just fired off in my head. I remember playing Phantasy Star Online, the demo, at least, on 360, and I think that was the game that, like, really had me on the fence about getting that keyboard attachment. I like had played a bunch of it and it's an MMORPG. So everyone else that's playing has like mouse and keyboards, or if they're on the 360, they have that keyboard attachment. And you know, they're not using it for anything actually good. Most of the time they're just like, oh, where do I find an e-girlfriend in this game? Where can I find my e-girlfriend? Can you give me 100 gold? Like, but you know, I couldn't necessarily use voice chat in that game, so having the keyboard would have helped me to, like, acquire more people for a party or at least communicate with teammates during missions.
There's something about having almost like a bonus item, you know? It's like, this isn't going to enhance a single game, you know, this isn't for a specific game. This is not something that is going to give me functionality that I couldn't otherwise have. You know, it just takes something and makes it faster, and smoother. And, you know, I mean, it's also like a brick on your controller. I mean, it's not like it was not an inconvenient thing to store or whatever, you know, but, there's something like tickling about having an optional add-on, you know, that you just like, you know, that this is completely auxiliary. You could completely get by without it, but at the end of the day, you want it, right? Like, you're like, yeah, I still need that thing. Like, give it to me. Let me have my things.
Yeah, exactly. A quality of life improvement is a quality of life improvement. And that's what we all want.
Yes, exactly. What about you, man? What's your you got a peripheral that sticks out to you?
Yes, I do, and it comes in the form of a controller. It's not a thing you snap onto a controller, but it's an actual controller itself. This controller helped you play longer by having fans that actually blew air into your palms that were like built into the like lower wings of the controller that you would grab. So I'm talking about Xbox, the original Xbox era, not like Xbox One, but like the first Xbox. So when that came out, Mad Catz was like super big. I don't know how big Mad Catz is now, but you know, we saw Mad Catz controllers for like every system. These were the ones that would have like see-through plastic, you know, they'd light up or some shit that like wasn't really that necessary for the game or even like the experience. But I think this controller was called the Airflow controller or something like that. It just made playing so much better. And I remember playing Amped, the snowboarding game on like the original Xbox, and just feeling like the coolness of the air blowing against my hands as I'm like sweatily trying to do like a 360 indie nose bone front flip rodeo. And like to some extent that inadvertently enhanced my immersion a little bit because the cool air was sort of like an aspect of being on the snowy mountain, right? Like the air was going to blow regardless, but
you're
like
freezing. I mean, with the way your hands are sweating, you're just dripping liquid. And you got the air blowing on it. It's like stepping out of the shower without a towel. You know, you're just evaporation is going on.
Exactly. And you know, what better way to get the hardcore gamers TM to like throw their money where their mouth is and like say like, here's this pro ass controller, you know, it'll keep your hands dry. You're not going to miss any 360 no scopes anytime soon.
It does feel like really rich person stuff. You know, it's like again, like there's something about these like auxiliary devices, right? That neither of us needed this to play a game, but it just like as a teenager, when you get anything that you want that you don't need, there's something so gratifying about that. You know, it's like, and very special. It's something you really savor and like you pay attention to those little things. But when you're like have your own paycheck and you're coming home, it's like, yeah, I guess I'll buy this thing. You know, who cares? You know, it's like almost like more impulsive, more carefree, but and there's less of that gratitude for like the small things like a controller that blows air on your hands.
Yeah, and I tried before we recorded this, like a day or two ago, I was like searching for that controller, and I can't find anything like it in like modern era, which is just such a shame, because that is such an amazing feature. And I can only assume that like either it didn't sell enough, or maybe there was some sort of like horrible technical backend that I don't know about, where like these fans were catching fire after like a year of use.
Yeah, or just breaking constantly, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so let's get deeper into peripherals. And I think the best place to start is actually figuring out what is a peripheral. Well, let's establish some sort of common definition that we can work off of.
Ooh, if I was listening to this podcast and not recording it, I would be like, what do these two things have in common? Like, why are they talking about these two things in the D-pad delights? Like, what could, I'd be trying to suss out what the definition of a peripheral is. Haha, pause if you want to keep doing that. Tell us, Carlos, what's a peripheral?
So a peripheral is, I guess we can kind of call it like a human interface device. Basically, it'll be like this piece of hardware that a human will use in order to communicate with a computer of some kind. So let's take the example of a Guitar Hero guitar controller, right? A human will grab the guitar, will be able to press the buttons, and it'll send a signal to the game that says, oh, this color is pressed down, and when I strum, I'm strumming. So at the very least, it's a piece of hardware that humans use to interact with the game. But there's also this special element to it, at least in gaming, where the peripheral is trying to enhance the user experience while they're playing the game. And most of the time, it's trying to give the player the actual experience that the game is presenting. So like with the Guitar Hero guitar, right? The experience is being a rock legend and tearing riffs all over the guitar neck. Whereas maybe something like Donkey Konga, this is like a bongo jungle game. It comes with an actual like set of Donkey Kong I don't know, barrels that are like connected to be a set of bongos. And again, this is all to serve making the player feel like they are the character in the game. Before we get to the point of virtual reality, of course.
The controller that you mentioned at the top of the show, is that something that you would call a peripheral? Because, where I'm getting hung up, and where, we've had conversations about peripherals in the past, and where I seem to always get hung up is that we talk about things like the Guitar Hero guitar, right? But we don't really talk about regular controllers, like the standard controller that would come with a game, right? So I formed the opinion, and I'm not sure whether or not this is correct, that peripherals are some kind of like add-on or extra rather than something hardware that would come with the game itself, right? Or come with the console. So when you're talking about this special controller that had fans, that's obviously an add-on, right? That's an extra, but if that were the standard controller that was like the pack-in controller, is that something that, would you still consider that a peripheral? Or yeah, so like just help me walk this line of what exactly is and is not.
Yeah, I feel like a peripheral is typically something that is optionally used. So a controller is like sort of mandatory. Like you need to use a controller in order to interface with the game. And this might be just getting into semantics or getting nitpicky to some degree, but your basic controller, that form factor, regardless of if it has fans on it or not, like you need that controller at the very least to get farther than the pause screen or like the title screen of a game.
Yeah, like you can't even boot up the game without a controller. So it's like extremely necessary in order to like run an application even.
Exactly. Whereas things like the DJ Hero turntable, the Guitar Hero guitar, these are all things that are very optional. Like you don't need a Guitar Hero guitar to play Guitar Hero. Like there are people who play it on controller. Same with like DJ Hero or like what have you. Like there are ways to play this on controller. Obviously it's not the most fun way, but
do you remember we used to do that? Like we used to sit in a living room and we would play like Guitar Hero or something on a controller, and like it's like all the buttons and whatnot, and it's just like so much weirder. It's like way less intuitive. The Guitar Hero controller, it's not like immersive in the sense that you actually feel like you're a rock star, Right. I would push back against that, but it is simulating, the kind of experience where you're like holding a neck and your other hand is where you would strum, so it is kind of getting you in that kind of mindset in a sense, but the controller just falls so flat.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why me personally, I wouldn't put standard controllers under the peripheral category because they are kind of like more or less mandatory in order for you to get through the user experience. But it is then when you take the next step to say, well, I'm going to get a guitar, or I'm going to get bongos, or I'm going to get a racing wheel, that it is now, oh, this is like enhancing the experience. It's absolutely not necessary to play the experience. And it is like, it requires input, of course. It alters gameplay to some extent because now I'm actually like driving around with a wheel rather than like pushing left and right on my thumbstick.
That makes sense. I like that. I think that's a solid like working definition for now. I'm curious if there's any other, I'm glad we got to discuss controllers a bit. But is there anything else that we should look out for as something that's, kind of an edge case or something that might make us feel uncertain?
Yes, I think something that would give us reason for pause would be something like the Amiibo figure or the Rumble Pack for N64 controllers. I consider these things to be more or less just devices. And I say that because these are sort of just things that they kind of exist on their own. They slightly enhance the experience, but like you're not putting input into a Rumble Pack. You're not putting input into an Amiibo, right? Like there's no A or B button on a Rumble Pack or an Amiibo.
Right. So an Amiibo has functionality, but it doesn't accept input. So it's almost in some ways like adding just a game cartridge. It's like having a second game or like running a program within the program, right?
Yeah, to me, an Amiibo is very similar to a Rumble Pack. Because like if I snap a Rumble Pack into the controller, now my controller shakes. But that's it. Like there's nothing else going to be read from that Rumble Pack, yada yada. But same thing with an Amiibo. Like, I'm just going to take this Amiibo, click it into this thing, and then it's going to like poop out some item into my game, and it's one and done. The Amiibo isn't receiving some information from the console that it now holds on to. I'm not pressing buttons on it. A slight edge case might be Amiibos and Smash Brothers Ultimate, because if I recall correctly, you could tap your Amiibo to the game, and then it created this like AI that would learn from its fights, and you could tap the Amiibo back to the controller, and then it would upload this AI save data or whatever to the Amiibo. Again, no buttons or anything, but it was basically being used as like this very individualized memory card, right? Like Bowser could only hold Bowser AI. Same with Donkey Kong and what have you. So it's not a general like PS2 memory card that you could just carry around anywhere.
Okay.
So those things I call devices. They simply take an input from the game and then do something. So the Amiibo is like, oh, I see the game port is ready for me to touch the controller. And the Rumble Pack is just, oh, I received data from the game cartridge or console telling me to shake, and now I'm going to shake, and that's it.
So it seems to me that these are different from each other, right? So I would think of the Rumble Pack as like receiving information from the game, and that information is like, oh, it is now my time to rumble. Like, this trapdoor has been activated, I must shake. And then from the Amiibo, it's like giving information to the game rather than like taking it, right?
Yes, most of the time, yeah. With the exception of Smash Brothers, like I just mentioned, right. The Amiibo, as far as I've seen, is always giving information into the game, and it's not continuous information. There's no like back and forth between the game and the Amiibo when it comes to actual gameplay and mechanics. It's mostly like, oh, here is an extra, like while you're playing or something like that.
Do you think the QWERTY keyboard I mentioned at the beginning is a device rather than a peripheral?
I kind of do, because...
Yeah, I kind of do too. Let's throw this episode out. No.
Like, the keyboard isn't there unless you had bought, like, Mavis Beacon typing for the Xbox 360. Like, right? The keyboard isn't, like, specifically enhancing the gameplay of any game. Like, even with my example where I talked about Phantasy Star Online and how this device would have made it easier for me to communicate with people, that's all it's doing. It's making it easier for me to communicate with someone. It's not making me a better Phantasy Star warrior or what have you. So yeah, I think I would consider it a device. I think a cool place for us to go next is figuring out like where and when peripherals were most popular. And I'll say, you know, first pass, I'm just going to take a wild guess and say arcades is where we see the most peripherals. Going into an arcade and you see like Time Crisis, you got the plastic guns. I think there's Silent Scope, that sniper game, which actually had like a full-size sniper rifle, plastic one, and you actually had to look through the scope in order to see characters on the game screen, because the arcade cabinet game screen itself was just like a picture of the Empire State Building. Now, if you look through the actual scope, you can see through into the windows and find enemies and stuff. I'm sure there's plenty more that we could discuss. Ryan, do any arcade games come out to you?
Well, I guess I'm curious. Like, these seem like controllers to me. Are these not just controllers? Okay, wait, dude. Yeah, have you ever played Sega Brave Firefighters?
No, I have seen it in a Chuck E. Cheese or two. It's like this really big cabinet that has like a fire hydrant at the front that's connected to two firemen's hoses, right? And then you're like co-op just trying to like spray down the fire on the screen. Like, it's basically a light gun game, but you have these massive hoses.
Yeah, it's like a first-person shooter in the same way that like Pokemon Snap is a first-person shooter, where it's like you're not actually, you know, shooting a gun, but like the controller, you know, is mimics a fire hose. It's almost like a shower head in a way. It comes up to like a cone at the top, and yeah, you point at the screen where there's fire. And I'm not sure if it's as precise as like you like spray at the base of the fire and the rest of the fire will go out. But you know, in my mind, that's how it works. Like, what a fun, chill arcade game, you know, like feeling like a hero. It's not like shoot zombies to stay alive. It's like put out fires because you're a noble person, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like, be an everyday hero, you know, clear out this building. I think that's really cool. And that I would probably definitely call a peripheral, right? These fire hoses. I think you could easily play this game with like a mouse. I'm sort of like seeing gameplay here and there in like YouTube clips, and it's very clear there. It's like shakily tracking where the light gun is sensing you pointing the hose, and that can be done with a controller. That's just simply moving the cursor, right? And then holding a button to activate the water. It's just really fucking cool when we do get the ability to grab this big actual sized hose, and they encourage, you know, an actual fireman's grip because they put a button at like the somewhere down the neck of the hose. Like, so you hold the front with one hand so you could turn the handle of the nozzle, which like will adjust the water. But then there's also a button that you would be having to press near your waist. So it again, this again is being a peripheral and enhancing your experience by now somewhat forcing you to enter this like fireman's pose and thus get a little deeper into that fantasy.
Yeah, I know nobody can see this, but Carl's is like in position at his standing desk, gripping an imaginary fire hose. Like, he's really ready to jump into like some burning barn.
Here at Deep in the D-Pad, when we explore concepts, we really need to just fully immerse ourselves in them, and you know, sometimes that requires taking the pose.
We're talking about these arcades, right? And the arcades they have unique controllers that are specifically catered to the game, but in some ways it kind of feels just like a mouse to me, like the way that like for like a mouse and keyboard, you could just use like the command prompt and like, you know, to run all your programs, or, you know, just like tab around the keyboard. So in some ways, like a mouse feels like it's this like, it's an accessory, but it's so ubiquitous that we consider it part of the machine itself, right? But we could actually get a lot of functionality without a mouse. And to say that like these arcade games could have been played with a controller feels to me like saying like the firefighter hose, you know, is like a mouse or something like that, where it's like to say that a mouse is not part and parcel of like a typical desktop, right? Like you've never seen these arcade cabinets without these particular types of controllers. So to call them peripherals feels like we're almost like cheapening it. Like this is how the game has to be played on some level. They didn't have to construct it to look that way, but there is no other interactivity with it.
I would only go as so far to say that the fire hose is how it has to be played if you want the best experience. Like, it absolutely can still be played with like a mouse. It could be played with a regular controller, but that is not how you would want to play it. Like, again, going back to Guitar Hero and DJ Hero on a controller, like that control scheme, it's there. Like, it almost legally, mandatorily needs to be there, but the developers don't want you playing the game that way. Like, they build the controller so you can play with that. And that's why I guess I just keep bringing up, like, hey, that's what makes this a peripheral. Like, it's making the game that much more fun to play, and it's actually, like, it's doing a much better job of simulating the experience than just the base controller.
It is the case that these games could like easily be played with mouse, though. Like, you think?
Yeah.
They initially had to be before they were like actually published?
Yeah, I definitely think so, right? Like, you know, as a developer, everything we do starts at like in the computer, at the very minimum, WASD controls and stuff so that we can debug what's going on and try things out. And then as that gets more layers to it, that's when the controller aspect starts to come into play. If you are working on a game that desires a peripheral, you're going to design for that peripheral. Like, you're not going to put all your efforts to design for the controller. That's what you're probably going to use when you're just like, oh shit, I need to test this level. Click, play an editor, do my thing with the controller. Now I'm done with this segment, and, you know, go to the next thing. But a good, maybe anecdotal story here comes from my time on Guitar Hero Live as a QA member.
I forgot you did that.
Yeah, I guess to give like a little bit of context to this, I had worked at Vicarious Visions on the QA team for Skylanders Superchargers and Guitar Hero Live. And during my time working QA on Guitar Hero Live, I was testing a lot of mostly the iOS version of the game. Guitar Hero Live was like full multi-platform shenanigans. And I was testing out iPad or I don't know which device specifically, like just iOS devices, playing Guitar Hero on a touch screen versus actually like using the guitar and connecting it to the iPhone and like playing it that way. But how this ties back into the story is that when there was an issue that was too difficult for a developer to reproduce, whether that's like, oh, this is a really hard section of the song and we need to naturally play it. Like, of course, there's like bots that just autoplay the song for you so you can like get to a certain part. But when you need an actual human player to reproduce that and like the dev can't really do that on their own, like, you would get called in. So there was like 2 or 3 times where like I got called to a developer's desk. They like handed me the controller and was like, shred on, like replicate this bug, And that is to focus on like the peripherals specifically. It's like, hey, like we don't care about controller here. We want you to test this on the peripheral. When we bug fix, we want to bug fix with the peripheral to make sure we are always servicing the player experiences that use the Guitar Hero controller specifically for, the Guitar Hero IP. But if we're talking like Time Crisis or Silent Scope, like I mentioned before, or this Fireman game, it very much would be like, again, way later in development when you guys actually have the controller and stuff, that you're doing the vast majority of your testing and deving like with these controllers in mind and or using these controllers actively.
Yeah, it makes sense that they would want to dedicate a lot of resources to like how they expect people to actually play. And going back to the arcades, right? Like, even though it is technically possible to run these games separate ways, it speaks to how much the developers care to give you a very particular experience. The fact that the controller is bundled, and physically attached to the game, and you can go visit, 5 arcade machines, and they will all be slightly different. The peripherals on them will all be different, and there's so much QA testing and development and manufacturing that went into each of those steps. Keep enlightening me. Let's go.
Yeah, it's a lot. The other area where I think I see peripherals most is in the music rhythm genre. So like we talked a bunch about DJ Hero, Guitar Hero, Donkey Konga, right? These are all music games. We keep mentioning music games, and I think that's because by and large, the vast majority of peripherals will go to either shooting games or music games. And maybe that's because like those are just the easiest translations for peripherals.
Yeah, I mean, look at Hey You Pikachu. That was a flop.
Oh right, yeah. What did that have? Was it just like a microphone you plugged into the N64 controller?
Yeah, it was. I joke about it being a flop. I had it as a kid. I have no idea how it sold, or even how people think about it today. I lost my microphone in a move, which sucked. But yeah, you could the idea was I think you hold a button and you talk to Pikachu. I'm like kind of getting it confused now because I think there was like Mario Party 8 or something. There, like
Mario
some
Party
for
8
the
came
GameCube?
bundled with a microphone, yeah. And some of the mini
whoa.
games used the microphone. But I don't remember if the microphone was mandatory for those mini games. There may have been an option for, playing those mini games without the mic. The game would detect the mic's not plugged in. Either that or they just wouldn't put those microphone mini games in the rotation.
Oh, that would make sense. That would be a good strategy to just skip over those games. That sounds sophisticated.
Yeah, don't even present the bug. Just remove any possibility. Something I'd like to bring up, though, with the rhythm game thing is games like OS, spelled OSU with an exclamation point. You might be familiar with these other titles that are very similar, but like Elite Beat Agents or Rhythm Heaven, these games on DS that would have you tap, tap, slide in an arc, tap, tap, tap along to the beat. That is what OS is. It's a touch-based music rhythm game. And for these games, we don't really see a peripheral because the screen is all you need to interact with the game. The screen in your own hands, of course.
Or a stylus, maybe.
Or a stylus, yeah.
Which, again, is more device than peripheral, I guess.
Yeah.
Because the stylus itself doesn't have any input. It's just it is an extension to your finger.
Yeah, exactly. And I just wanted to bring that up because I thought it was a good juxtaposition to everything else we've been talking about with the guitars and the turntables and what have you. Oh yeah, we have a whole series of music rhythm games that don't really have a controller to them. Now, granted, people find a lot of different ways to play this, whether it be like, oh, I'm just using my mouse. Like, I'm playing this on computer, I'm using my mouse. I see people use like drawing tablets, digital drawing tablets, and their stylus pens to like play it that way, which I think looks very cool, but I imagine it's also, super difficult. But those would not count as peripherals for that game, because very clearly they are more like the keyboard device that you put on the bottom of the Xbox controller, right? They are just these interface devices that are already there, but they happen to be controllable for this title or two.
I remember playing rhythm games on my phone that are similar to like what you're talking about, right? Where you'd like a Guitar Hero type of screen where the notes are coming downward and you had to hit the buttons and maybe like hit and hold, or hit several at the same time. There's something about the actual like Guitar Hero guitar or like Rock Band drums that I feel more connected with the game, right? There's something about it that feels more special and engaging and exciting. And also, like the thing that always comes to mind when I look back on the like rhythm boom is the amount of space that these machines took up, right? The idea that like my mom let me have like a guitar, like two guitars and a Rock Band drum set and like a microphone just taking up space in this living room that's a communal space. I'm thankful for that. I'm like, wow, she really let me get away with a lot, right? Like but and you'd also go to like other people's houses and they would also have it, and you kind of just took it for granted that it's like, of course, like, yeah, like we love Rock Band. How are we not going to have a Rock Band, or like right. How are we not going to have a Guitar Hero guitar? But they were kind of like, from the standpoint of an adult who isn't playing video games during that era, they're an eyesore, or at least like something to trip over, or some kind of like hazard or inconvenience, or, they're throwing off the mood of the room. But there were just a ton of us who were, fortunate enough to like have parents who let them play these things, and keep them, even if we played like, let's say we played like 5 hours a week or something at some point in our lives. All the other hours of the week, that drum set isn't getting folded down.
Right.
That drum set is standing up. It's 3 feet tall, and you're gonna keep it there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, at least for the duration that you are interested in playing the game, you're gonna have some part of your room being taken up by the peripherals for that game. One honorable mention that may not entirely do this are the more plasticky DDR dance pads. Like I remember I had DDR Mario Mix, and like once I was done playing that game, I could just like fold, put it in the closet, and like be done, which is like leagues better than the Rock Band drum kit, which I think is honestly like the hardest part of that set to like put away. The Guitar Hero controllers are obviously, you just put them to the side somewhere. The microphone you can put in a drawer, but then you got this whole 2 legs, fucking 2 big plastic pieces sandwiched between. It's wild.
I'm so glad you mentioned DDR. I also had a DDR mat that was like plastic and rolled up. I think I got it for like a present at some point in my life. But the input on that was just sketchy. That was not a consistent, durable piece of hardware, right? Like it was thin, and when you think about DDR, right, if you didn't own one of those, you would think of like the 5-inch platform made of metal with the lights, in the arcades again,
and the bar that would go behind you that the pros would fucking lean on as their feet are just tippy tapping all through the song.
Yes, and then to compare that to this like this wired connection, it's going into like player 1, and even to control the DDR game, you're like hitting up, down, you're hitting the diagonal buttons to like hit OK or back or whatever. It's one of those times where you knew this wasn't as glorious of an experience as it could have been. It was like, it was just like the quickest result, it was like, how can I get DDR into the home? And it's like, well, I guess we have this plastic crappy mat that nobody's going to be thrilled with. Like, let's throw that to people, and we just ate it up.
Yeah. I'm just remembering I had actually 2 DDR mats. I had I think it was Nyko or Mad Cats. It was one of those like kind of third-party brands had made their own DDR style game and had its own mat, which was like largely sort of foam based or whatever. So it it folded, but it kind of like didn't want to fold because the foam wanted to just like go back to its flat self. Whereas the DDR Mario Mix Mat was like easier to fold. It had a much like sleeker, slipperier top part because it was like nylon or something. And that made it a little dangerous because occasionally from folding the thing every so often, one of these like nylon, whatever you want to call them.
The sensors?
No, like the actual plastic along the top that you would step on, like that stuff would occasionally like have a little break in it, which created like this nylon splinter that you could like step on. So, whereas the foam mat didn't have that problem. Like you get the ease of folding it, but you have to deal with the potential of stabbing yourself in the foot.
Yeah, just imagine, like, you know how, like, super, super rich people have, like, could have, like, a bowling alley in their house or, a movie theater type of thing. Just imagine, like, a DDR, like, dedicated, like, 8 DDR machines, like, top power, like, best of the best DDR experience.
That 100% exists. I'm sure some millionaire, billionaire at this point has it, like... Elon's special DDR dungeon. Here are all my Teslas, and here's my 18 different versions of DDR. I got the metal mats for all of them, and I branded it Tesla for no reason. So I briefly mentioned, like, when are peripherals most popular, and we sort of kind of mentioned the case like over and over and over again, but we haven't explicitly stated, but I think the point where peripherals were most popular was during the initial Guitar Hero Rock Band boom. Like maybe up to Rock Band 3. I feel like by the time Rock Band 4 came out with like the keyboard, it was petering off and it started going sharply downhill definitely after Rock Band 4. And I think that was largely in part with, like, Guitar Hero came out first. Red Octane made their Guitar Hero controller peripheral, and Harmonix was, like, helping to make the Guitar Hero game. And then eventually, like, there was a bit of a breakup, and now Harmonix was like, we're going to make Rock Band. Guitar Hero introduced the concept of using a guitar controller to convey this musical experience. And then Rock Band came in to say, well, let's explore that wider, right? We give you a guitar. That's a given. We already know how to do that. But now we're going to give you the bass guitar. Now we're going to give you vocals. Now we're going to give you a drum kit. And I think, the Rock Band style of game definitely like carried itself for a long time and was kind of ultimately done in by the amount of times they were trying to sell us like the same guitar controllers essentially. Like there was no full upgrade to them. They just looked somewhat different. But that's definitely the point where, like you mentioned, we were going over our friends' houses and seeing these drum kits and guitar controllers like everywhere. And it wasn't just our friends' houses, right? It was like millions of houses in America and wherever else like had these things. And around the same time, started getting sick of seeing it so much in the house and not wanting to like buy more of these kits.
Are you implying that part of the bursting of the bubble of the rhythm game boom is has something to do with like the peripherals, or the fact that these companies are continuing to try to sell more peripherals, and at some point it's like, how many different devices can I possibly own? And like, why can't you just make these things more compatible with each other? Is that?
Yeah, I think so. And, we did have the option to just buy the game disc on its own. Like we certainly had that option. And I can't quite recall if, certain drum kits would only work for certain games. I remember though, that like the Rock Band set had, I think, like the 4 pads, but then Guitar Hero made their own drum kit, which now had cymbals on it or something. And right there, that to me is like, oh, we need to differentiate ourselves, to create competition, but you're constantly splitting your player base. And that's something that comes up often in game development, is this question of like, are we going to split the player base? Can we not split the player base? And what I mean by that, to give a really relatable example, is when like the original Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was out, right? And we all had the same 16 maps or however, and then map packs start to come out. and people buying mat packs can only play with people who own those mat packs. So like you and me, we can play together, but now you bought like 4 additional levels. And if we want to play together, you can't enjoy those levels. I can't enjoy those levels. And it's kind of like silently encouraging you to just play with other people that own that content. And I think that has since largely gone away from the games industry because it's much more about keeping as many players together as possible in order to, to some devious degree, churn money. But with the music instrument peripherals, I think with every 1 or 2 games, not only every 1 or 2 games in the series itself of like Rock Band or Guitar Hero, but then also like between these different IPs, they were so similar, but then had 1 or 2 differences that made Peripherals incompatible with the other games. So you almost kept having to get these specialized peripherals as year after year these games came out, which ultimately was like, why the hell do I have this like basic Rock Band drum kit when like I can't use that on Guitar Hero World Tour, but now I need to have 2 different drum kits taking up space? Like, what if I just really love music rhythm games and I want to play the hell out of a bunch of these like different things? Now I need to have the cymbal guy in my freaking living room. I need to have the Rock Band drum set in my living room. Oh, turns out like Guitar Hero Live has like a different set of buttons than these other Guitar Heroes, so I can only use that specific controller for it. And I think it just became like too much for people to want to spend money on, let alone take up space in their house.
Yeah, as consumers, we wanted them to continue to iterate, right? Like people weren't complaining when there would be a specific, like Beatles Rock Band came out, and it's like, great, if you're a Beatles fan, like that's something that you might get really excited about, and now you can, play Rock Band with just Beatles songs, right? But that doesn't require new hardware, right? You can just...
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It used the old like controllers, and I think that was great. And we saw that a little bit with Guitar Hero as well. And I think that was sort of them realizing like, oh, we can't just keep making these new-ish controllers or these controllers with like one slight thing different. Let's go ahead and put out games that will continue using these current controllers that we have out, at least while we're trying to figure out how to iterate and innovate on the controller itself.
Right, and I really like your point about having 2 different drum sets like in your home at the same time, right? And part of the reason I like that example is because I imagine myself swapping out the drum sets, right? Like I imagine myself like lifting it up, this unwieldy piece of plastic, and then, dropping the drumsticks, and I'm just like lurching over to like put it in by my stool or something, right? And then, also then imagining like a third drum set, it's like, at what point does it become so absurd that like you just have to start laughing, right? Where it's like, you have 6 drum sets and you're like labeling them, you're trying to keep it all straight, it just kind of drives you mad,
Exactly, yeah. You're spending, oh man, remember the price of these controllers too? Like the guitar controller I think was at least $60. Like you were spending, man, gosh, it's like, I'm like going in the way back machine now. Just I'm seeing myself in Best Buy, seeing Guitar Hero for the first time. I Love Rock and Roll is playing through the fucking demo screen. And I'm just like, what is this? I swear, I went into Best Buy to buy Okami, and to this day, I have not played Okami because fucking Guitar Hero took my eye away from it. And that's not to say Okami's a bad game. I'm just like, I'm bad. I end up not getting around to games when I should.
You got distracted.
I got very distracted by Rock and Roll.
Did you buy Rock Band? Did you buy Guitar Hero that day?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, yeah, I went in to get Okami or something. I'm pretty sure it was Okami. And then like, I was just playing, I started playing the demo and then ended up just like for the next like 20 minutes, just playing more and more songs. And I was like, that's it. Dad, I need this. Like, this is the game, this is the controller. It's going to cost like $90 or whatever it had costed. But like, I got home and just ended up playing for like 2 hours straight, like these songs. And my dad was very interested because he was like, I've never seen this guitar controller before, and I kind of like the music that's playing. So like, let me see. And like, he thought it was a neat novelty that
what is this newfangled peripheral my son's interested in?
And he thought it was a neat novelty to see like me with not much musical talent, like shredding on these buttons, probably wrongly thinking like, maybe there's musical talent here, when it's just like, nah, bro, it's just hand dexterity. But yeah, like, I don't know why that, I'm not entirely sure why I just brought all that up, besides the fact that, again, just to reinforce that Peripherals enhance the experience that much, like that it could shift a buying decision. Someone could go into the store with like their heart set on this certain thing, and then all of a sudden, bam, like here's this new novelty, here's this shit you've never seen before, and it's going to blow your mind, and you go for it. And I think that's what a lot of us did through a lot of that music era, right? Like, beyond the Guitar Hero stuff, like when we saw DJ Hero, I remember you and I got super into DJ Hero, and like that shit was so cool. And man, do I wish DJ Hero continued on. That rip to a true one. Gone too soon.
DJ Hero really was a fantastic game. We used to have so much fun. That was after, I think I would consider, without like looking up years for this, right? I think DJ Hero came out after I would have considered the bubble to have burst already. Like, I feel like that was pretty late game music rhythm where, like other games popped up that you'd never heard of before, right? Like that, can you name anything that was instead of like Rock Band, it would be like Rocking Star, it's like, what is this? I guess I'll try and see what songs
Hero. There was
Band
Pop
Hero.
Hero. I remember one of them had like a Taylor Swift song, and I was like, is this the only reason why they made a new fucking band kit? Like, just so they could get a Taylor Swift song? Like, just release that as DLC, or just release that as a disc. Why are you selling this whole, they always sell the whole rock kit with the game. Not always, like I already said, they'll sell the disc, but like when you walked into Walmart during those years, it was always, oh, here's the shelf that's just filled with a bunch of like big boxes that are just Guitar Hero, Band Hero. Granted, DJ Hero was a lot smaller box, but like still DJ Hero, Pop Hero, maybe Punk Hero. There were so many fucking heroes apparently. And yet here we are with the MCU. I guess our heroes are different now.
I think that there's no way that we could understate how impactful these games were, or like they were cultural icons, right? To the point where if there was a museum of peripherals, right, it's like that thing needs to like start and end with some like Rock Band Guitar Hero gear. Make sure there's a duck hunt gun there, but we're spending way more time than we planned to talk about these music rhythm games. But it really is because they saturated, a few years that I can't really think of anything in video gaming specifically that was that, it's almost the way that like zombie, I feel like we're living in like a zombie era with like media right now, like TV and movies, like the last like maybe like 10, 15 years even, it's been like a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff, a lot of things involving like undead plus post-apocalypse. And, just to try to like latch on to like another cultural moment that like really is deserving of its time in retrospect, right? Like once we're done writing about zombies and like constantly watching zombie flicks, we may not even realize that we're doing it to an extent because it's like suffused so much of our culture. But 20 years from now, when we're thinking about other things, we can look back on this era and be like, whoa, we were really obsessed with like dead human beings eating human beings,
Yeah, exactly. And there's like a lot of different like symbolic reasons that like zombies get used, and there's non-symbolic reasons that they get used. But like, I would say gaming wise, the other like big bubble, and this is not really related to Peripherals at all, but this is to give context to the era, is like that's the same era where the bro shooter was like so big, bro shooter meaning like the Gears of War, Army of Two, just peak Xbox 360, like, hey bro, after school, like, let's play some games where we shoot things and they blow up and blood's everywhere, you know?
Yeah, Halo, Call of Duty.
Yeah, Halo, Call of Duty, certainly, like, all those games were, like, that genre in general was rising, like, alongside the music rhythm. Like, I feel like pretty much the two modes of, like, Xbox 360 were, like, I'm playing Halo 3 or I'm playing Guitar Hero / Rock Band. And, like, which one are we doing today, right?
But was there a actual bubble bursting with the brochure? I feel like that's still just like a steady train, and maybe I'm out of touch, but like there is a palpable difference in like music rhythm games, the saturation of music rhythm games.
Yeah,
you know, in 15 years ago or whatever compared to today.
Yeah, I do think that the bro shooter era did die down. I think our shooters today are very different from what we would have considered bro shooter back then. We certainly do still have the bro shooter, I'll say maybe like grandfathers around. Like Gears of War is still a series. You and I played Gears 5 all the way through, and that's like Gears is the most bro of bro shooters. Like look no further than the bros of Marcus Phoenix and Dom, like for the peak example on these things. But we don't really see that super often nowadays, or even like, let's say in the last like 5 or so years. Definitely like Halo is still around, and, you know, a couple of other games are still around, but I don't think there's any big emphasis on this extra machismo co-op shooter type experience. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be co-op, but I think that's part of the bro nature of the title, right? And I'm getting a little too deep into this totally unrelated D-pad, but I'll just cap it off by saying, like, the bro aspect of bro shooter, I think, spoke towards the fact that it was cooperative and overly machismo, which, like, is what Gears of War is somewhat known for.
Yeah, I mean, the guys are super fucking jacked. Like, they are, like, cartoonishly enormous.
Yeah, and they all have voices, like, they fucking have a rock crusher in their throat, like.
Yeah, word.
But let's talk about the past and when Peripherals started. So I did a little bit of research for this episode to figure out like a bit of the history of Peripherals. I do not have the full picture, and would love it if those of you listening have like these really good peripheral callouts or like things you used in the past that you're like, oh, is this a peripheral? It'd be dope to hear about that, and maybe even send us a picture or a video of it. Send that stuff over to our Twitter at DeepDpad, because we absolutely would love to see more of these peripherals that we've never heard of, or even maybe give a bit of a deep dive into stuff that you all have used in the past. Now, when did Peripherals start? What I found via Google was something called the Vectrex.
Oh, is this like the first peripheral ever? Is that where you're going with
Potentially, yes. Again, I don't know if my history is 100% accurate here, but when I search for first video game peripheral, I come up with the Vectrex, which is a very old vector display-based gaming console back from like the 80s. I think it released in around 82, 83, something like that. But the Vectrex itself isn't the peripheral. Granted, the Vectrex, it has its own TV. It has its controller like already like snapped into it. It's almost like this like portable gaming unit, right? That you don't have to like necessarily plug into anything else. But the peripheral part here is the 3D imager, I believe it's what it's called. It was a pair of 3D glasses / goggles that you would buy for the system, and it allowed for those games to then render in somewhat of a 3D manner. Again, this is like vector-based graphics, so everything is more or less 2D. Like, it's just lines connected to lines. But if you put on this big, clunky set of goggles and you look at the game, it suddenly has that extra layer of depth to it.
I feel like that's really sophisticated for the time.
Yeah, it certainly sounds sophisticated. I'm pretty sure the execution of it like would probably be something closer to a Virtual Boy, where it's just like, oh, this is pretty neat, but it's gonna melt my eyeballs because it's 1980. But the 3D glasses, along with the pen, which the pen you could actually like press to the screen and like draw, and maybe there were like some games that used the pen as well. But that is the result I found when I was looking into like, when did Peripherals start, right? My initial guess was Duck Hunt, because that's as far back as my memory goes, right? Like Famicom, and the fact that it was a light gun just immediately to me was like, oh yes, light gun is peripheral. Cool. I don't know if you could actually play Duck Hunt, like proper Duck Hunt on a NES. Like, I don't know if you could actually play that with a controller. Like, you might have actually needed the light gun in order to play that game. Whereas with the Vectrex, you don't necessarily need the 3D goggles or the pen to play like some of these games. It probably, just enhances the experience. The thing that's missing, though, is that it's not necessarily like simulating the gameplay, right? Unless you have a game where it's like, oh, you're an artist, like draw something and use this pen to draw something. Then like, sure, that could somewhat be a peripheral if it also has like input and output type things.
Yeah, I feel like, I think when you were first creating the criteria, right, you brought up the fact that like Guitar Hero guitars like are simulating, like actual playing guitar. Donkey Konga simulates bongo playing, right? I think that is best case scenario. There's that. It's kind of like we've talked about like ludonarrative harmony,
right?
And ludonarrative dissonance as well. I feel like this is a similar type of thing where it's like like peripheral game harmony. I mean, I don't know, you can put that in better language, like package that better, but there are going to be times where especially in the early days, like the peripheral isn't matching exactly what the player in the game is going to do, but we would still probably classify it as a peripheral and just realize it's an imperfect one.
Yeah. And maybe another way to kind of say what you're trying to break down is the cohesion between the player experience and the simulated experience. Like, there's something there, and, maybe we'll have to kick it back and forth in a bonus bite down the road, but there's definitely something there that you touched on that it seems pretty cool that I'd like to explore further, like the harmony between a human interface device, specifically a video game peripheral, and the experience the game is trying to present.
But can you talk about like how a peripheral is made? Like what should we think about? I guess let me take a step back. One of the things that I think about is like, one, how hard it is to get old peripherals, right?
Yeah.
So it's like they kind of become lost to time because they're limited run. It's not like they're constantly making Donkey Konga bongos, like they're still producing those all the time. So you have to get used ones, and there are problems with that, right? It's hard to replace game history and archiving. We've talked about those kinds of things. There's also the environmental consequences, right? Like how many of these Rock Band drum sets are just wasting away in landfills, right? So I'm curious, those are some of the like, I guess, negative aspects that maybe like are kind of hidden to people, right? I wasn't ever thinking about this stuff before we started talking about it. But what are some of the other like behind the scenes like development types of things? Can you speak to, from inception to creation, the process of a peripheral?
I can speak to that somewhat. I don't have any personal experience like bringing one of these peripherals through development, but from what I understand of the industry and what I have researched on my own part, at the very beginning, it starts with like, what is the experience that this peripheral, this product is being made for, right? So let's just say we've been working on Guitar Hero for like 6 months, and we know we have the music track there, we have the notes, and we're like, okay, this plays on controller, we can play I Love Rock and Roll, it all works, but it would really help if we had an actual like thing that made me feel like I was actually playing the song. What can we do for that, right? And then you kind of, I guess, would find a product designer. Like, again, like going back to earlier in this conversation, I said Red Octane had designed and manufactured, I think, the controller for Guitar Hero 1. And Red Octane, when I was looking them up, they've actually made like a bunch of different hardware devices. Like that seems to be kind of like their bread and butter. So you have this product, this Guitar Hero game, it's only software, and you go to a company, say like Red Octane, and speak to people to figure out like, okay, what's going to simulate this experience that we have? We have this experience of you being a Guitar Hero, quote unquote. Well, obviously then we might want to start drawing up a guitar controller. Okay, now we know what the general shape of the controller is going to be, but like, you know, what does the controller do? Like, and from there, it's like a lot of back and forth and collaboration between the product designers, but also the game developers / designers, where it's, you know, we have 5 colored buttons and we need a way to activate the button when it is being held down. Right. And that translates into, okay, I'll give you 5 different colored buttons on the neck of the guitar. And, oh, you need an activation. That's obviously strumming, because you need the strum in order to activate the note that's being held down. I imagine from there, it's like, okay, well, can we integrate the whammy bar into this? It could potentially lead to cool things where the product actually somewhat influences the game. I don't know if this happens ever, but I could see that being a possibility where somebody, you know, a product designer is drawing up this like sick controller, and then they're like, oh, we haven't considered the whammy bar. What does that do? And, you know, that then leads into like star power or like milking more points and modifying the sound. And as that kind of drawing phase keeps going through and you're finding out more of like the technical aspects of the controller, this isn't just like drawing for the sake of making it look good. This is technical drawing. Like you need to spec out what the actual size of it is. You need to spec out where components are going to go, like the sensors for the buttons being held down. Where is this switch for the strum bar going to be located? Where are we going to put the whammy bar? And then like, is there a spring between that whammy bar so it bounces back up after I push it down? You know, how do all these guts come together? And that's like some like next level stuff that kind of like escapes my understanding. But I do understand that it's like very precise, very technical. And once you have those mock-ups in place and you're ready to like commit to trying out this product, you don't like go and just make a million of them, right? It's still an iterative process. So you rig up whatever the,
like a prototype, right?
Yeah, you prototype the most like somewhat satisfactory version of what you want this like controller to be, and then you get a little feel for it, and who knows, it might have just been like, it could potentially just be like a circuit board that was like put onto 2 pieces of cardboard, right? So that it just held all the components in the right spot. And then once they figured out like, oh, okay, these components seem to work, everything's in the right location, you now start to get into the phase of like, okay, what material are we going to use for this? I guess like, are we going to go with plastic? Is the whammy bar going to be metal? You know, how is that going to affect things like potentially the Bluetooth signal that goes between the 360 and the Guitar Hero controller, right? You don't want any input latency. And then I just think from there, it's also a matter of like, how much would that cost? Right? We talked about the DDR pads, right? Building the metal ones, hella expensive. Like if you wanted to buy those back when we were like seeing them in the arcades all the time, I think the metal mats were like $500 or something, if not more. And, you know, juxtapose that to the Mario DDR, which is like $60, and the pad is like this kind of nicer plastic, whereas like the, you know, Mad Catz DDR game was like a kind of a lesser plastic. It wasn't, maybe it was more foam based. So those decisions there, I think, are typically based off of like what the budget is or what the scope of the product is. So Guitar Hero, obviously being this game that like had lots of money put into it, at some point started like putting in better stuff for their controllers. That's why, you know, we eventually did get that Rock Band kit or that Guitar Hero kit where now they're using like real metal to like stand up the legs as opposed to just flimsy plastic or something like that. And I think that's kind of like more or less where it goes. Like once you actually have the finalized product designed and you know how it's going to interface with the game and you guys are already playtesting it and you're like, that's it, this has got to be the final version. From there, I imagine it is much more of a business conversation of like, all right, how many units of these controllers are we going to make? How many do we expect to sell? How many are we expecting to just kind of stay on store shelves? And are we okay with that? Or do we need to adjust our numbers?
Yeah, it seems kind of obvious to state that a lot of work has to go into making and like manufacturing peripherals, designing them. But when you lay it all out like that, like I do kind of like see it more clearly, and it reminds me that these objects that I kind of take for granted once they're in the world, right? I just, it's like, yeah, of course, that like this Ddr Mat, there has to be a lot of financial backing before that thing even makes it to you, right? Like, so many resources have to be invested, not only in the software, just like any other game that you're purchasing, but in this extra step of getting this very specifically designed device that is supposed to pair with it. And I can see that being a huge business risk. Like, why would you want... It's like, no, this kid already has a controller. Why am I going to invest in a game that requires that he buy a separate controller? Like, again, like that's like splitting the audience, right? Or, there's an extra paywall that like people, perhaps like aren't going to want to pay for unless that is an exceptional product and it really stands out. And you'd have to have a lot of faith in it in order to go through with making it.
Right, exactly. Like somebody similar to my situation could have walked into Best Buy wanting to buy Okami, and then they see the Guitar Hero game and they think, well, I don't really want to get a new controller, or I don't have space for a new controller, I don't have money for a new controller. Maybe.
Or that's cheesy. Like,
exactly, yes.
This isn't even a real guitar. This is so stupid. Like, it could have totally, like...
Which there were people that did say that about the Guitar Hero controllers, and I think most of the time these were like actual like musically leaning people who like had experience with the real instruments, whereas many of us and our friends, we did not have that experience with the musical instruments, and that's why the simulation appealed so much to us, whereas the simulation isn't going to appeal to them because they can play a much higher fidelity version of that simulation by using the actual guitar that they know how to use. It's a huge risk that I don't think many other companies would have taken if Guitar Hero 1 and 2 didn't blow up the way they did.
Yeah, because at that point it's kind of like follow the leader.
Yes.
It's like, oh, this is a gold, like this is the gold rush. It's like if we can get an instrument out there fast enough that can take off, and people are already familiar with this type of object, it's they'll easily be swayed to buy these upgraded versions. Guitar Hero 1 isn't like the best; it's just the first.
Right, exactly. Today's skill tree is going to continue our thread on peripherals, and I am going to share with y'all usability and design principles, specifically for things like child's toys, but this is much more widely applicable. This data, though, is like largely gathered from studying children's toys, like talking about very small children who maybe don't know yet how to use their words and stuff. They're still forming their senses, but this is a great place to learn what humans are going to do when they're presented with certain things. So just to kind of go down this list of product principles, and maybe I'll elaborate with each bullet or I'll elaborate after. The product should be usable without instruction, meaning, Guitar Hero controller, we can sort of tell, okay, I grab it, there are these colored buttons, and I can kind of like flick this switch. I don't necessarily know what it's going to do immediately, but I can sort of experiment with it to get an understanding, right? And
wait, I need to take a step back. So you're telling us like principles of toy design that are used for... We're specifically focusing on children prior to the development of like sophisticated thought and abstract thinking. Is there, right?
Yeah.
In order to like explain principles of toy design. So you're saying like like a block, for example, a kid could use without and like stack them, or like Jenga blocks,
like
or
a
something
Lego.
like that.
Yeah, a Lego would be a really
Like
good
a Lego,
example.
yeah, good
So
example. Yes.
let's kind of keep running with the Lego actually for this list, right? So Legos, instead of product, Lego should be usable without instruction. That's principle one. Okay, well, a child grabs a Lego and they sort of see that there are grooves in the bottom of it that match the stuff on the top of it. So if I grab another Lego, then maybe they slot in. Bam, you know how to use Lego.
Yeah, I mean, just experimenting, pushing things together. I mean, eventually you're going to stack two Lego if you have them.
Yes. Another pillar here is that your product, your Lego, whatever, give positive reinforcement. And this is a note about player feedback. It's basically positive reinforcement is just more so another way of saying, like, have your equal and opposite reaction when the player takes an action, right? So if a small child grabs a colored ball and part of their toy set is a slide, they can put the ball at the top of that slide, let it go, and then watch it travel through the slide down to the bottom. And that right there is their form of feedback, right? They've taken a game object, they've released it into the level or whatever you want to call it, that module, and now that ball is like traveling through the module. The baby or whoever is using it sees like, oh, the thing I just interacted with is now doing something on its own. Oh, and it's at the bottom. Okay, that's how it works. All right.
And it causes you to want to like repeat on that, right? Like you put the ball on the slide once. That was fun. Let's do it again. Let's keep this ball slide going.
Exactly, yeah. And to give maybe a different example, let's take one of these like baby dolls, these baby dolls that you gotta like fake feed, fake change their diaper and whatnot. Positive reinforcement comes in the form of the baby cooing or giving a giggle as opposed to crying when you do actually change their diaper or feed them or what have you. Now, whoever is interacting with that toy knows, oh, if the baby's crying, like I should do this because it goes like, haha, goo goo, like when I feed it or whatever. So that's positive reinforcement.
For the Lego, is like the stimulus that like a kid might want, like the way that the Legos snap into place, or is it like seeing the creation? Like how would you, I kind of just want one toy that's a through line. I like the different examples, but just so that we could stick with like one that we see all the ways it's applied.
Yeah, I gotcha. I think the positive reinforcement within Legos is them sticking together. Like, you've done a Lego correctly if they like are now two pieces become one, right? You've messed up your Lego if you break it in half, like one individual Lego piece you break in half, but you get a saw. Exactly. But you're doing Lego right when you take those blocks and you hear it like click, or you feel it like get stuck together and you're like, oh, okay. So these guys will, have some sort of structure if I just keep putting them together. And, that can go to like a more macro level where you're now thinking on, say, the structure of the Lego. Like if they're building Hogwarts or something like that, you're getting this positive reinforcement of seeing the form slowly come to completion as you're snapping Legos together.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Also, I know that that the plural of Lego is Lego, and I also know that, but it is so hard to not say Legos.
It is so freaking hard, dude. Oh my gosh, dude. I saw this Seth Meyers clip where he is discussing the exact same thing, and he's like, people have commented on the video that the multiple of Legos is Lego, but I'm just not gonna do that because I've been living on the word Legos forever. And that's kind of how I feel, but I want to make sure that I'm like saying it properly.
Yeah, saying Lego is like saying foyer instead of foyer.
Now on to our third pillar. There's going to be 6 pillars total, okay? We talked about the first pillar. Lego should be usable without instruction. Second pillar, Lego should give positive reinforcement. Third pillar, Lego should challenge new users and experienced users appropriately. With that being said, the example here, right? Lego, if you're a brand new person to Lego and you don't really know how it works, right? The challenge is like creating something either from the book or from your mind's eye, just like creating something, right? But an experienced user kind of takes it to the next level. That's where we get like our master builders from the Lego movie or whatever. It's like, I'm going to tear apart the Empire State Building and build the Batmobile, like using the same exact blocks or something like that. So
it's like scalability. It's like there's so many things like this, right? Like you could, if you've never cooked before, you could make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and be like, I am masterful. I'm so good at these PB&J sandwiches, you know? Or you could make a roux, whatever that is, right? You know? And like,
yeah, exactly.
That criterion is really interesting to me for some reason. It's like, it feels really accessible. It's like anybody can do this, you know? And I mentioned cooking, you know, or if you're learning music, right? It's really similar where it's like, you could just like, if you can play in the key of C all day, you know, and like just play, you know, or even learn what the key of C means, right? It can always get more advanced and more sophisticated, and you can build up, you know, you can learn, you know, let's say you learn more scales and you're able to like improve, you know, your deftness within that specific realm, right? How does this relate to peripherals, though? Is it like a game should have an easy mode and a hard mode? I mean, is it something like that? Like, where are you thinking of the connection to peripherals?
That's a good question.
For the record, this is like principles of toy design, as you said, right? So like everything doesn't have to track perfectly. Like peripherals don't have to have the exact same, you know, formula, because we are talking about like different age group. Like it's not age appropriate. Lego and you know, like Donkey Konga don't necessarily have the same target audience, right? And they don't have the same function in a person's home. So I wouldn't expect it to be identical.
Right. I think where peripherals lie in this pillar is more in the software. It's actually, let me backpedal on that a little bit and say it's maybe a little hand in hand on both, right? Taking the Guitar Hero controller, we have 5 buttons, but only 4 fingers that would reach them because our thumb is along the backside of the neck, and we can't use our thumb to press one of the Guitar Hero buttons on the front, right? So the challenge to new users is, hey, if you're on easy mode, you only have to hit the first 3 buttons. Like the challenge is use your index, middle, and ring finger to do these different fret patterns, right? And as the difficulty gets higher, it then becomes, okay, use all 4 fingers. And then beyond that, it's like, now manage moving your hand up and down the neck so that you can get that last note. And I think that's where the spectrum of like challenging new users to experienced users, how that half and half falls with the game and the controller itself.
Okay, that's cool. What's number 4?
Our 4th pillar is that Lego should be unbreakable. Lego are Lego no matter what. Like, even if you cut it in half, per se, you'll still have a couple slots for a Lego brick to, like, click into the Lego that you just broke in half. But even with you breaking it in half, it did not lose its functionality to, like, click into something else, right? I guess it would lose that functionality if you sanded off the nubs and you put concrete in the other side so like nothing could get in there. But at that point,
right, the point you're making, everything is technically breakable with enough force or with enough effort, right? But for the most part, these things are,
the point should be that
sturdy.
The product design itself should be unbreakable, right? The idea and the functionality of that within the presented idea should be unbreakable. At the point where I was mentioning where you're like grinding it into dust, like you've gone beyond this pillar, like you're just doing outside stuff. I am not entirely sure if this directly relates well to, say, something like a Guitar Hero controller, because I could see scenarios where people like use the Guitar Hero controller to like play other games, even though, you know, they're not designed for that. But like people have used a Guitar Hero controller to like beat Dark Souls, right? And that's clearly like not what it's meant to be used for, but its peripheral still was like reconfigured or whatever to actually like be this controller where you can move around and do this action combat. I don't know if I would consider that, you know, metaphorically breaking the controller or the design of the controller, but it certainly feels different from Lego remaining to be Lego, whether you break apart an entire structure or you have an individual one.
Right. So you're not just talking about like the Guitar Hero neck shouldn't be able to snap
Correct.
off very easily. Okay.
This is not just about physical integrity. This is about the actual understanding of what this product is. Like, a Lego will snap into another Lego, and it can be unsnapped from that Lego, and it could build something, and those same exact pieces can build something else. That design is fully unbreakable.
But if I take a Lego and I put it in Barbie's dream house, did I like, is that like a mod for the Barbie? Like, is that like a Barbie's dream house mod where like now Legos are in my Barbie's dream house? Like, I feel like you're almost kind of breaking the idea of the toy, assuming it's an unstacked Lego. It's a single Lego. Maybe Barbie uses it as a step stool or something like that. I've hacked into the idea behind what like Lego is supposed to be used for.
Okay, so it sounds like you're approaching it from a kind of like idea side of it, like, oh, the Lego is meant to stack, but now I am not stacking it. I am using it as like a stepping stool for Barbie to get something off the high shelf.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it's functionalism, essentially, yeah.
I don't think that breaks the design of Lego. Like, sure, you're not using it to snap pieces together, but that's not changing what that Lego is. Like, that Lego can still snap into other Legos and still, get snapped into.
Relate that to the Guitar Hero guitar that's used for Demon Souls, though. I mean, could I not take that guitar after I'm done playing Demon Souls and then actually play Guitar Hero with it anymore? Like, if I saw someone playing Demon Souls with a Guitar Hero guitar, I would be like, whoa, that's crazy that they're playing Demon Souls with a Guitar Hero guitar. I wouldn't say with a Demon Souls guitar. Like, I'm always going to think of that as a specific object in the same way I'd be like, whoa, that kid is using like that Lego as a step stool, right? So like on some level we can look at the specific function that it's serving in the context, right? Where I could just be like, no, that toy is a stool. That is not a Lego. That is not functioning as a Lego right now. So I'm not going to give it the credit of a Lego, right? To just identify the object, right? And take everything I know about the object and kind of like the permanent representation that lasts in my mind from moment to moment. A Guitar Hero guitar is always going to be a Guitar Hero guitar regardless of the setting that I see it in from this point forward, because I'm so used to it having that function.
Right. And, I think I'm kind of coming around to agree with you in that the way I'm looking at it now is a Guitar Hero guitar is very clearly only to be used in a guitar-like fashion. There is at no point at which the game is asking you or even giving you the possibility to like, tap your fingers on the controller in order to be a drummer, right? The guitar controller is always used in a guitar function way. Now, that's including the Demon Souls example, because still you're holding it like a guitar, you're pressing the frets, and you're simulating a guitar experience. And I think in that still being the case, actually the design of the Guitar Hero controller is fairly unbreakable, because even though you can kind of reprogram the buttons to do XYZ, it does not break the fact that you're still like shredding on a guitar the entire time you're using the controller. Same with Lego, whether it's individual or whatever, you're still using it as a Lego,
That's cool. Yeah, what's the fifth thing?
Our fifth pillar is that the user of the product, let's say the Lego, should have easy access to help. Right? Or rather, the product should have an easy way for the user to get help. This could be mimetic, like one child watching another child play with Lego and realizing, oh, okay, monkey see, monkey do, I'm going to snap some Legos together. Or it could be what we've mentioned before, simple experimentation. What happens when I'm like putting these two Lego together? Oh, snap, they came together. And bam, like you've learned how the thing works. So that's what it means to have like easy access to help. How I would tie that into the Guitar Hero controller, I think would be maybe about the same way, right? Like you could go on YouTube, right, and watch somebody play the game and see what they're doing with their hands. You could be in Best Buy, watch somebody demoing the game. Or, if you're just on your own, you can load up the game, just go into practice mode or go into an actual song and start tapping on the buttons and see what the game does when you press each button, see how it reacts. Because again, there's that layer of player feedback like we talked about a couple of pillars ago. it's letting you know, like, hey, you've performed an action, and even on the bad notes, right? Like, you still need feedback to let you know, like, you didn't hit the right color or you didn't hit it on the right time. So that's still giving you reinforcement to let you know, hey, like, get back on track, or hey, you're doing the right thing. And then the last pillar for our Lego or our Guitar Hero controller is that the product should ensure upgrades are optional.
Whoa.
And this I will juxtapose Lego with current day technological devices. So a Lego from like 50, 60 years ago can be used exactly the same way today as it was used back then. And it will be used today the same way a modern day Lego is produced today. Like, nothing will ever change there. But if your iPhone is 5 years old, you can't update like your apps. You actively start losing functionality of your product because updates or upgrades are mandatory.
Yeah, I mean, I could go off about how frustrating that is, you know, I mean, how much slower your phone is, or, you know, the fact that a phone bought 5 years ago could become obsolete is really not a customer-friendly model. But, I mean, has Lego actually been around for 60 years? I mean, that's a real thing. Like,
1932 in Denmark.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I can't believe it. It's such a basic and like universal, oh gosh, it's kind of mesmerizing, you know, to think that like a Lego found could still be interchangeable, you know.
Yes.
And there's a beauty in that, and you know, I mean, it's tactile, right, in a way that like software isn't, and I don't understand all the constraints, you know, and how things are optimized, you know. I can't get into the nitty gritty of that, just because I don't really have the background there, but.
Right. And again, like just to, you know, blatantly explain it, right? You grab one of those initial Lego and it can still be used to build what it was built originally. Or you could say, oh shit, this 1950s Lego, I'm actually going to use like a gaggle of them in my 2017 Hogwarts castle build. And like, it'll still snap in place correctly. And, you know, this, that, and the third, like, it still works. Whereas I can't play Cut the Rope anymore because iOS 15 apparently has some firmware thing that, like, doesn't blah, 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 right? That's just an example. I don't actually know. But, like, there have been several games that, like, I used to play on my iPhone that just, you simply cannot play anymore, right? Unless you, like, keep a device that's locked to a very specific software update that you now only use to like play this. Like, that's horrible product design. Right.
So for the gaming peripherals specifically, do you feel like that they usually meet that criterion or not? The ensuring upgrades are optional thing.
I think as time went on, it started becoming less optional, right? Going back to the drum kit, we talked about how the drum kit had like the 4 like pads at first, and then an upgrade happened where now they have cymbals, and it was like, oh, okay, I guess in order to play these games, I must get this upgrade. Otherwise, I will not be able to hit these buttons.
That's a new game with a new peripheral, like set of peripherals, though.
So then maybe we take, let's say, Rock Band 3 to Rock Band 4, potentially, where it's now like, okay, you've got your drums and your guitars and your mic, but now we're introducing the keyboard, and you kind of need the keyboard to play that game.
Okay, so that's an example where the keyboard is not optional, so upgrades are not optional.
Yeah. Right. If you want to continue playing Rock Band, you must upgrade to the current version that uses either this specific controller or this specific grouping of controllers. Similar to how, you know, Guitar Hero reached a point where they stopped using the rainbow 5 colors and they split it into like a top row of buttons and a bottom row of buttons that were like white and black. And now you can't use that Guitar Hero Live controller on any other version of Guitar Hero because, you know, granted they set out to make a whole new controller and stuff, but it's within that family of games that like you come to expect, okay, this is what the controllers look like, and I'm sure, at the very least, the guitars are going to remain usable throughout the series. I think we keep kind of butting up against the drum kits and some of the other stuff that tried to penetrate that market. But really, like, I think the guitars are kind of the constants through that series. And if I recall correctly, even if you compare the Rock Band guitar to the Guitar Hero guitar, there are like big differences between them. I think maybe specifically with the sort of like the solo area, when you get to the bottom of the neck and you can just like tap it and it automatically strums for you because you're in a sick, you're in a sick fretting solo. But we did see that actually make its way to the Guitar Hero controllers by the time World Tour came out. Just to kind of recap it, so I know I've been talking for a bit, but just to give you these pillars, like just easy back to back, your product should be usable without instruction. Product should give positive reinforcement when the player does something. Basically, acknowledge the player's doing something with your product. Pillar number 3, challenge new users and experienced users appropriately. 4, be unbreakable. Make sure this product is always this product, not physically, but like when they use it, they're always using it the same way.
Yeah, like irreducible.
Exactly. Pillar 5, product should have some way to easily access help. And then the final pillar, ensure the upgrades are optional. You want to have this product used as much and as long as it can be, right? Because that's how it avoids the landfill.
Yeah, is there a name for this like overarching like philosophy or anything? Like, is this like something I could like look up on my own easily, or what's the
If you wanted to search out more information on this, I think you could search usability and design principles, and that should get you a good variety of links that you can then dive into.
Thank you for listening to Deep in the D-Pad. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share us with your friends.
For updates and discussion, follow us on Reddit at r/deepinthedpad, Facebook at deepdpad, and subscribe to Deep in the D-Pad on YouTube. Don't forget to hit the bell.
And if you want to ask us questions or get a chance to share your own D-Pad delight on the show, email us at askdeepinthedpad@gmail.com. Be sure to put question or delight in the subject line.
Big thanks to 8-Bit Jazz and Kevin MacLeod for supplying the music for the show.